This video was brought to you by Nebula. As you probably noticed, the European economy is having a tough time at the moment. Growth is weak, productivity is stagnant, and the main solution proposed by Mario Draghi's recent report, namely hundreds of billions of dollars of joint borrowing at the EU level, is completely at odds with both the tide of Euroscepticism sweeping the continent and the pivot to austerity that we're seeing in places like France and Germany. However, one country apparently unafflicted by this European malaise is EU candidate country Serbia, which is enjoying some of the strongest GDP growth and wage growth on the continent, and just had its credit rating upgraded by Standard & Poor's. So in this video, we're going to take a look at Serbia's quiet economic boom, and try our best to explain how Vučić bucked the European trend. Before we start, if you're interested in things like Serbia's candidate status and relationship with Europe, then you might like our brand new poster, Every Global Alliance Explained, which shows in slightly confusing detail how every country interacts with each other. It's available by clicking the link in the description, and for a limited time, you can get 20% off with code Schengen. So, let's start by taking a look at the data. Over the past 7 years, beginning in 2018, Serbia's GDP has grown at a rate 2.5 times faster than that of the European Union. According to data from the International Monetary Fund, Serbia's GDP has increased by a total of 26.5% during this period, compared to just 10.2% in the EU. When the COVID-19 pandemic hit in 2020 and Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, many European economies were severely impacted. But Serbia managed to weather this storm relatively well. This apparent resilience was largely because Serbia continued buying Russian energy supplies, which account for a quarter of its oil imports and 2/3 of its gas imports. Since then, however, Serbia's economy has continued to grow at an impressive rate. As we mentioned in the intro, year on year, Serbia's GDP rose by 4.7% in the first quarter of 2024, and by 4.2% in the second quarter, significantly higher than the EU's growth during this same period. Forecasts currently suggest that Serbia is on track to achieve GDP growth of approximately 4% in 2024, well above the Eurozone, which is looking at a mere 0.8%, and large European economies like France and Italy, which are forecasted to grow by only 0.7%, with Germany looking even worse at just 0.2%. Even the fastest growing countries in the EU, like Poland and Ireland, are expected to see growth rates of just 1.5% and 1.2% respectively. Serbia has also maintained a relatively low debt-to-GDP ratio of approximately 50%, despite high levels of infrastructure spending. And Serbia is expected to run a modest budget deficit of around 2.9% of GDP this year. While this is still a deficit, and above the 2.2% that was originally set aside, it's within the Maastricht criteria, which is in itself pretty good by European standards at the moment. France, for instance, is due to run a budget deficit nearly twice as large as Serbia's, and other European countries like Finland have only been able to stay within the 3% target by resorting to drastic austerity measures. Other economic indicators also look good. Serbia's main stock index, the Belex 15, has surged by more than 28% since the beginning of 2024 to its highest point in 10 years, while Serbian borrowing costs have also steadily decreased, helping to push up its credit rating. For context, Serbia's bonds were long considered too risky for institutional investors, but earlier this year, the 3 major global credit rating agencies revised Serbia's outlook from stable to positive. And then last Friday, S&P upgraded Serbia a notch, meaning that Serbia now has the highest investment rating among EU candidate countries, and matches EU members like Hungary and Romania. Anyway, this is all good news for President Aleksandar Vučić, who hailed the credit upgrade as a personal victory, stating Serbia is now playing in the top leagues. Serbia's economic overperformance will also help to distract from his questionable and potentially authoritarian political tactics, which have long upset the Serbian opposition. So, anyway, why is Serbia's economy actually doing so well? Well, it seems that there are a few key reasons. The first is high domestic demand, which has been driven by an impressive increase in wages. While the average salary in Serbia is currently €825 per month, 41% below the EU average, it's a significant improvement from the 55% gap in 2020. According to the data from the first half of 2024, average wages grew by an astonishing 14.7% year on year, Although this still falls short of President Vucic's aspiration to raise the average salary to €1,400 by 2027. Now, we should mention here that Serbia is experiencing some stubbornly high inflation rates, with year-on-year inflation sitting at about 4.5% for the past few months. This means that some of this nominal wage growth will get eaten away by higher prices, but it still amounts for real wage growth of nearly 10%, which will be basically the highest in Europe. So higher wages have helped push up consumer confidence, which has increased significantly over the past year or so, setting Serbia apart from the rest of Europe, where consumer confidence generally remains low. It also looks like some of this domestic demand has been driven by well-placed government investments. In 2022, the state allocated €3.4 billion to transport, energy and infrastructure projects. This increased to €4.8 billion last year, with projections of €5 billion by 2027, roughly 7.5% of the country's entire GDP. In practice, this means building stuff like new roads, trains, or digital infrastructure, which in turn have made it easier for Serbian consumers to be economically active. Anyway, Serbia's strong domestic demand sets it apart from the rest of the EU, where the energy crisis, weak wage growth, and subpar investment have made the bloc increasingly reliant on foreign demands in the form of exports, hence the reoccurring trade surpluses. The other big reason that the Serbian economy is thriving, at least according to the S&P report, is a lot of foreign investment. Foreign investment came in at more than $4.4 billion last year, way more than any other similar economy, with money coming from both Europe as well as controversial sources like China and the UAE, a consequence of Vucic's East-West Balancing Act. A Chinese contractor, for instance, is currently building a rail link between Belgrade and Budapest, one of the region's most ambitious projects. In the first half of this year alone, Serbia attracted €2.3 billion in FDI, with over half going to the mining industry and construction, which now accounts for about 6% of GDP. Now, some of these investments have invited controversy. For example, earlier this summer, Vucic signed a $2.4 billion lithium project deal with Rio Tinto, which has faced a significant backlash from Serbians concerned about the environmental impact. Nonetheless, Vucic is going ahead with it, and has claimed that it could boost GDP by an astonishing 20% annually if global demand for lithium increases as expected. All in all, as things stand, Serbia's economy looks pretty, great. Now, to be clear, we're not saying that everything is perfect. Many Serbians, especially those who haven't seen a pay increase, are struggling with an inflation-induced cost of living crisis, and that's not to mention the democratic backsliding that's increased in recent years. Nonetheless, the headline numbers are undeniably impressive, and the central role that wage-driven domestic demand plays in this equation might be a lesson for European policymakers. Now, throughout this video, we've discussed how Serbia has outpaced the EU's shrinking economy, but across the pond, the US economy is also doing exceptionally well. Despite that, Americans seem pretty unhappy with the Biden administration's handling of the economy, and 59% of Americans wrongly think that the US is currently in a recession. Weird, right? Well, it's maybe not the most odd thing that's happened during a campaign that's featured bear burials and brat summers. But we've been paying attention to all of these things because they're not just silly, they're actually politically quite important. In fact, we've been documenting them in WTF USA, our slightly tongue-in-cheek look at the US election. Each week, we dive into the online discourse, explain the politics behind the stories, and tell you if you really need to pay attention. For example, in recent episodes, we've talked about Trump's foray into the world of crypto, claims of dog eating, and AI-generated Musk memes. These might sound stupid, but they actually tell us a lot about the candidate's economic plans, the state of post-truth politics, and how the US feels about its deficit. That is to say, WTF USA brings you the wildest moments from the 2024 election, tells you the hidden political meaning behind each of them, and then if you can just ignore the chaos, or if you should follow along. New videos come out every Friday only on Nebula. That's the streaming service we've built alongside a bunch of our creator friends, and where you can find all kinds of superb content like WTF. We're super proud of WTF USA, and we hope that with your support, we'll be able to make other interesting, weird, and entertaining series with Nebula in the future. So signing up genuinely helps TLDR to grow and expand. As I say, it's not just WTF either. There's a whole bunch of other original content on the service, from creators like Real Life Law, Wendover Productions, and Neo. You can also watch every normal TLDR video ad-free on Nebula as well, and in some instances, before they land on YouTube. If you're not a member already, click the link in the description to get 40% off. That's just $30 for a year, or $2.50 a month. We really hope you check out the series, and as always, thanks for your support.